Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It started the summer I turned 22 when the air in our little coastal town clung to the skin like warm silk. Days were lazy and long, nights stretched into early mornings. I had just graduated from university, no job lined up yet, still. Half floating between adolescence and adulthood. My best friend, Marissa, was the one fixed point in my life. We had known each other since we were 12, surviving each other's worst haircuts, worst heartbreaks, and worst ideas. Her parents' house had always been my second home. It was the kind of place that felt like summer even in winter, with its big windows that framed the bay and that wraparound deck where you could smell the sea even when it was miles out. Evelyn, her mother, was polite but chilly, always immaculately dressed as if she were hosting someone important, even on lazy Sundays. Her father, Daniel, was different. He was approachable, easy with a laugh, and the kind of man who made you feel like what you were saying mattered, even if it was something small. I'd known him for years. But that summer was the first time I started noticing the little things. The way his shirts fit across his shoulders. The faint streak of silver in his hair. The way his voice softened when he spoke directly to me. The first night I felt something shift. It was one of those humid evenings where the air was so still it felt like time had slowed. We'd been on the deck after dinner, a few of Marissa's friends still lingering, the music low, the wine flowing freely. Marissa was busy laughing with a guy she'd been seeing, and I found myself talking to Daniel. At first, it was about nothing travel, the view, my half-baked plans after graduation, but there was an undercurrent to his attention, a warmth that lingered a little too long. When I got up to leave, he touched my arm lightly, almost absent-mindedly, and my whole body seemed to notice it. It wasn't enough to be wrong, but it was enough to stay with me from there. The lines blurred slowly. A shared joke in the kitchen. A look across the table that lasted a fraction longer than it should have. I started finding reasons to help him when Evelyn asked for something bringing. Him tools in the garage, helping arrange chairs for one of their endless barbecues. Always innocent. Until it WSN single quotes T. The night it happened, the rain was heavy and the sky was a low, bruised purple. Marissa had gone out with friends. Evelyn was upstairs on a call, and I was in the kitchen with Daniel. He poured me a glass of red wine, and we sat talking while the rain drummed against the windows. His voice was low, and when I laughed, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. I should have moved away, but I didn't. The kiss was sudden but deliberate. His hand cupped the back of my neck, his thumb brushing my jaw. It wasn't tentative, it was the kind of kiss from someone who had already thought about it more than once. My heart was pounding so loudly that for a moment I thought it might drown out the rain. When he pulled back, I whispered, "We can't." "I know," he said softly. "But no one will ever know, I promise." We kept it quiet, hidden between the folds of normal life. He never made me promises about love or a future. Instead, he gave me moments. The way his hand lingered on mine when he passed me something. The quick glances when no one else was looking. The heat in his gaze when we were alone in a room. I told myself it was just attraction. A summer thing, but the secrecy made it addictive. Every smile we couldn't explain. Every touch that was too brief. It was a language only we spoke. Then came the night it all cracked. Marissa and I had been drinking on the deck, and she started talking about trust, how some people weren't as loyal as they seemed. She was talking about an old boyfriend, but something about her tone made my chest tighten. I snapped back without thinking, saying she didn't even know half the truth about her own life. Her laughter stopped. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could almost hear the pieces falling into place in her mind. She didn't confront me right away, but the next day Daniel called. His voice was sharp, rushed. "She knows," he said. "Or she suspects. I'll take care of it." But he didn't, or maybe he couldn't. It unraveled fast. Evelyn found out. There was shouting, slammed doors, and then nothing but silence. Marissa stopped answering my calls. People in town started looking at me differently. Daniel moved into a small apartment by the marina. Months later, he asked to meet for coffee. He looked thinner, more tired. The man who had once seemed unshakable now looked like someone who'd been living in a storm. I told you I'd keep it a secret, he said quietly. I should have kept everything to myself, even from you. I didn't tell him that I'd been thinking the same thing for months. That sometimes, late at night, I replayed every moment, wondering where I could have stopped it before it started. Now, when I pass by the old house, it's someone else's lights strung across the deck, someone else's laughter drifting into. The night, the promise he made to keep it hidden lasted only as long as the summer, and the wreckage it left is something neither of us can forget. I didn't see Daniel again after that coffee for almost a year. It wasn't because I didn't think about him. I did far too often. It was because every time I considered calling him, I could hear Marissa's voice in my head, the way she'd said my name that last night we spoke, like it was something bitter in her mouth. After everything came out, I tried to rebuild my life in small, careful ways. I got a job at the bookstore downtown. I moved into a small studio apartment above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread was the only thing that made me feel human some mornings. But the gossip didn't fade quickly. In a town like ours, people didn't forget, they just stopped saying things out loud. One night, about 8 months after the fallout, I saw Marissa at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, her hair longer, her face a little sharper. For a second, I thought about pretending I hadn't seen her, but she turned and our eyes met. There was no anger in her expression anymore, just emptiness. We didn't speak. She picked up a bag of oranges and walked away. It was almost worse than if she'd yelled. A few weeks later, I ran into Daniel. I was locking up the bookstore when I saw him across the street, leaning against his car, smoking. He looked different, more stubble, his shirt sleeves rolled up like he couldn't be bothered to button them all the way. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just crossed the street and said, "You look good." We stood there for a long moment, the quiet between us too heavy for small talk. Then he asked if I wanted to get a drink. I should have said no. Every part of me knew I should have, but I did end single quotes T. We ended up in a small bar by the marina, the kind of place where no one really knew your name, but everyone could guess your story. We talked, and it was so easy to slip back into the rhythm we used to have too easy. By the time we walked out, the air between us felt charged again, the way it had that first summer. He walked me to my car. I could feel him looking at me, waiting, and I knew right there that if he kissed me, I wouldn't stop him. But he didn't. He just said, "You're still the only person who really understood me." That night kept me awake for hours. We started meeting again after that. Not like before, no stolen touches, no rushing to be alone, but in a way that felt like circling something dangerous. He'd call, we'd have coffee, we'd talk about books, movies, his new job. We never talked about Marissa or Evelyn. We never talked about the summer. Until one night in late autumn. We were sitting in his apartment, a small place with mismatched furniture and a view of the water. He'd been telling me about a deal at work, but halfway through he stopped. His eyes held mine for too long. "You know, I still think about it," he said quietly. "About us." It was like a door swinging open in my mind, one I had nailed shut. My pulse quickened. My breath felt too shallow. "I don't want to go back there," I said. "Neither do I," he replied. But his voice told me he was lying. That night, I left before anything could happen. But the truth was, the more time I spent with him, the harder it was to pretend I didn't want what we'd had. And maybe that's why. 2 months later, it happened again. It wasn't planned. I had gone over to drop off a book he'd lent me. It was snowing, the streets quiet, and he invited me in. We ended up on the couch, drinking wine, talking about nothing important. Then, without thinking, I reached over and touched his hand. He looked at me, and there it was, that same pull that had started everything. When he kissed me, it felt both inevitable and dangerous. We both knew it couldn't last. But we also knew we were going to let it, at least for a little while. What I didn't know then was that this time, someone else would find out. And when they did, the damage wouldn't just be to us. It would reach further than either of us imagined. After that snowy night, Daniel and I slipped back into something that was both familiar and different. We weren't careless like the first time. There were no lingering touches in public, no long looks when anyone else was around. We met only at his apartment, always after dark, always with an unspoken agreement that the past was something we wouldn't talk about unless it was to pretend it was behind us. But the truth was, it never really was. In some ways, it felt more dangerous the second time because we knew the cost. That summer had blown our lives apart, and yet here we were again, rebuilding the wreckage just so we could set fire to it all over. One night in February, I was lying on his couch, my head on his lap, the sound of the marina's frozen water creaking outside. He was running his fingers through my hair, looking down at me with that half smile I remembered too well. Sometimes, I think, he murmured, if we'd just met under different circumstances. I didn't let him finish. I didn't want to picture what he was about to say because imagining it hurt more than the reality we already had. But despite our carefulness, the universe seemed determined to expose us. The person who caught us wasn't Marissa, it wasn't Evelyn. It was Claire Evelyn's younger sister. She lived in the city most of the time, but came back now and then to visit family. One rainy Thursday in March, she was in town for a real estate showing and decided to surprise Daniel with dinner. Unfortunately, that was the same night I was at his place, barefoot in his kitchen, cooking pasta while he opened a bottle of wine. The knock at the door froze us both. When he opened it, Claire's expression shifted from surprise to something sharp and calculating. Her gaze moved past him to me, standing there holding a wooden spoon like it was a weapon. Her smile was slow and cold. "Well," she said, "this explains a lot." She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. But the weight of that look told me she wouldn't keep it to herself forever, and she did in single quotes T. within a week. Evelyn knew. She didn't call me this time, didn't even give me the chance to explain. Instead, I heard from someone else that she told Marissa and that Marissa's reaction had been explosive. That was how I ended up with a voicemail from my former best friend at 2 a.m., her voice shaking with rage. "You're pathetic," she said. "Do you know how disgusting it is, what you've done? Twice. You really think you mean anything to him? You're just a distraction. You've always been disposable." I didn't delete the message right away. I listened to it a few times before finally erasing it because part of me wanted to believe she was wrong, and part of me feared she was right. The fallout this time was messy. Evelyn's lawyers started circling. There were rumors about custody, battles for Daniel's youngest son, about selling the marina business he co-owned with a friend. Every time I saw him, the lines around his mouth were deeper, the light in his eyes dimmer. "You're not the cause of all this," he told me once, after I tried to pull away for good. It would have ended this way eventually, but I didn't believe him. By spring, it was clear we couldn't keep going. The secrecy that had once been intoxicating now felt suffocating. The looks we gave each other were laced with too much history, too much guilt. One night in April, as the tide came in hard against the dock, Daniel stood in the doorway of his apartment and said, "I can't ask you to do this anymore." I didn't argue. I just nodded because I knew if I spoke, I'd break. The last time I saw him was in May. I was walking along the bay and he was sitting on a bench, staring at the water. He didn't see me and I didn't call out. I just kept walking, my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, the wind biting at my cheeks. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about knocking on his door. I think about what might have happened if we'd been braver or smarter or luckier. But then I remember the promise he made that first night, that no one would ever know, and how easily it was broken. Some secrets aren't meant to be kept. Some are just meant to destroy. 2 years passed Dot by then. The whispers had mostly stopped, though in a small town like ours, people never truly forgot. They just moved the gossip to the back of the shelf, ready to pull it down again when boredom struck. Marissa had left. She moved to Seattle for a job in marketing, posted filtered photos of coffee shops and rooftop bars, and never once reached out. Evelyn sold the Bay House and moved inland. I heard Daniel had stayed in the apartment by the marina, but I never went near it. I kept my distance in the way you do when you're trying to starve a wound of oxygen, hoping it will finally heal. I told myself I was done thinking about him. I'd even started seeing someone, Evan, a soft-spoken history teacher who liked poetry and made me feel, if not consumed, at least safe. But the truth was, Daniel lingered like the taste of wine you can't quite forget, Dot. It was a Friday in early summer when I saw him again. I'd gone to the harbor for the town's annual food festival, weaving through crowds, when I spotted him by the oyster stand. He was alone, wearing a light blue shirt I'd seen 100 times before. His hair was a little longer, and there was something softer about him, less armor, more weariness. He saw me almost instantly. We didn't wave, but our eyes locked long enough that it was impossible to pretend it hadn't happened. Later, as I was leaving, I heard footsteps behind me, still avoiding me. His voice hadn't changed. It still had that low, measured tone that made me feel like every word was meant just for me. I thought it was mutual. I said, "It was." He replied, "Until I saw you." We stood there on the edge of the pier, the noise of the festival fading behind us, replaced by the gentle slap of water against the dock. He asked how I'd been, if I was seeing anyone. I told him about Evan, and something flickered in his expression, gone before I could name it. "I'm happy for you," he said. But it didn't sound like the truth. We parted without touching, but the pull between us was still there, undeniable and dangerous. The next week he called. I didn't know how he'd gotten my new number, but hearing his voice sent me spiraling. Back to nights in his apartment, the smell of his cologne, the sound of rain on the windows. "Coffee," he said. "Just coffee." It wasn't just coffee. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, and by the time the cups were empty, we were walking along the beach, our shoes in our hands, the wet sand cool beneath our feet. He told me about the years since the divorce finalized, his strained relationship with his son, the business deals that had soured. I told him about the bookstore, about Evan, about the loneliness that still crept in at night. Dot. By the time the tide came in, I knew where this was going, and I hated myself for not stopping it. We ended up in his apartment. The walls were different colors now, and the furniture had changed, but the air between us was exactly the same. When he kissed me, it was like no time had passed at all. Dot. Afterward, we lay there in the dim light, the old pattern reasserting itself. He traced slow circles on my skin, and for a fleeting moment, it felt almost like peace. But peace with Daniel was an illusion. A month later, Evan found out. He didn't yell, he just walked out, the sound of the door closing sharper than any argument could have been. And just like that, I was alone again, caught in the same cycle I'd sworn I'd never repeat. This time, though, I didn't wait for Daniel to end it. I left first. I blocked his number, stopped going anywhere near the marina, and buried myself in work. It's been 5 years since then. I live in the city now. I manage a bookstore and I date occasionally, though I've learned to keep my heart at arm's length. Marissa is married. I know because I saw the announcement online. She looked happy, and her new husband had kind eyes. I haven't spoken to Daniel since the day I walked away. But sometimes when I pass by a man in a blue shirt, or when I smell a certain kind of cologne, I feel that old ache again. And I wonder if somewhere on a quiet night by the marina, he's thinking about me too, wishing, like I do, that we'd never made that promise to keep it a secret. Because if we hadn't, maybe it wouldn't still haunt us. The city was buzzing with summer heat, the kind that makes the air feel thick and alive. I'd been invited to a book launch at a small rooftop bar downtown, and I went more out of politeness than desire. The crowd was a swirl of strangers and half-familiar faces. The kind of event where conversations floated above the clinking of glasses. I was standing near the railing, looking down at the streetlights far below when I heard a voice behind me. Still avoiding me? I turned, and there he was. Daniel. He looked older, yes. There were lines at the corners of his eyes, and the silver in his hair was more pronounced, but he was still Daniel. Still that presence that filled a space without. Trying. I laughed softly. You're the one who vanished. I had to, he said. If I didn't, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to stop. We ended up in a corner, away from the crowd. We talked for hours, catching up in the way people do when they know each other's past too well to pretend. The air between us was heavy, electric, like we were standing at the edge of something we'd been circling for a decade. When the event ended, neither of us said goodbye. We just walked together wordlessly to a quiet street where the city noise faded. He reached for my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Come with me, he said. We ended up in his hotel room. The moment the door closed, the years fell away. His hands were on my face, my waist, pulling me in like he'd been starving and I was the only thing that could save him. I kissed him back like I'd been holding my breath since the day I left. Clothes came off between gasps and laughter and the kind of desperation you can't fake. We tumbled onto the bed, the city lights spilling in through the window, painting his skin in gold. His touch was slower this time, almost reverent, like he was memorizing me again after too long apart. God, I've missed you, he murmured against my neck. I didn't tell him I'd missed him too. I showed him in the way I clung to him, in the way I couldn't stop touching him, in the way I let myself get lost in the heat of it. It wasn't like the first time, all urgency and forbidden thrill. This was deeper. We moved together in a rhythm that felt inevitable, like we'd been meant for this all along and had just taken the long way to get here. After we lay tangled in the sheets, his arm around me, my head on his chest. The city hummed beyond the glass, but inside that room, there was only us. I don't care about the past anymore, he said quietly. I just want whatever's left. And for the first time in years, I didn't think about the wreckage, or the promises we broke, or the people we hurt. I just thought about him, about us, and the fact that somehow, after everything, we'd found our way back to this. That night, there were no secrets, no guilt, no pretending. Just love, raw, messy, passionate, and ours. And I knew without question, it was the way our story was always meant to end.